Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Asher Marketing Podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Asher Agency, a full-service marketing agency with offices in Indiana, West Virginia, and Washington, D.C. For nearly 50 years, Asher has helped our clients tell their stories, reach customers and prospects, and stand out from the crowd. To learn more about how we can help your company, visit asheragency.com or contact us at hello@asheragency.com. My guest today is Cortez Strickland. Cortez, thanks for joining us.
Oh, anytime. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, you have a really interesting career path, so I want to get right to it. And I'd like to start by asking you, when did you start thinking about careers? For some people, they know when they're, kids, what they want to do. Some of us, myself included, didn't find that out until much later in life. But when did you start thinking about careers? What jobs were you thinking about, and where did you go from there?
I think for me, it started like the very first day of going into beginning news writing as a freshman at Alabama State University. I always loved sports. I was a big basketball fanatic, and the light bulb went off like, wow, I could make a living off writing and going to basketball games and maybe potentially being a columnist. So that was my dream, like to be an NBA columnist. I wanted to just be an NBA columnist, and that was my dream. So I chased that as long as I could.
Okay. And so did you grow up in Alabama? Is that what led you to ASU?
No, I grew up in Michigan.
Michigan. Okay. So how'd you find your way to Alabama State?
So I ran track. It was a track.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's how I got to Alabama State. I ran track. By the time I became a junior, it just became too much of, workload and, school and practice. And I just wanted to just be a regular student. So By the time I became a junior, I was like, I'm done. I just want to just be a student. I just couldn't handle the pressures of being a student athlete and, trying to work and things of that nature. Just give it a break.
Yeah. Well, if my recollection is correct from looking at your LinkedIn profile, you started your career with a really well-known name in sports, that being ESPN. How did that happen? And talk a little bit about the work that you were doing there.
So ESPN they were out recruiting, and I happened to get in contact with one of the recruiters. And it was a funny thing is that they had a job fair at Howard University, and we just happened to be going. So we went up there and realized like, oh, that's the guy I've been communicating with over email. So he was like, hey, I didn't know you were coming here. He gave me an interview right there on the spot, and he offered me a job. Their production assistant program, which it was like a program that they would bring in, soon-to-be graduates for. It was a 9-month program, and if you kind of fit the bill, they kept you on as an employee. So that was my way of getting in. But I never wanted to be, in television. I wanted to just be writing. So for me, it was a way to just get into ESPN and try to finagle my way into a writing position. So that's how I got into there.
All right, that's interesting. So it was what for some people might be a dream job, but for you, it was just a step in the direction toward what you really wanted to do. So from there, it looks like you went on to do some sports reporting and some editing, and then some work on the journalism side in Northwest Indiana. Walk us through those stages of your career. And then what I'd like you to do, if you don't mind, is pivot to how and why did you end up pivoting away from sports journalism, and where did that take you?
So when I got to ESPN, I really, coming out of college, you think you know everything. And then, you end up at a company like ESPN where, I'm dealing with my coworkers. They're coming from really established journalism schools. So I'm dealing, I'm with, coworkers from Northwestern, Arizona State, Missouri, Syracuse, and I just didn't have the experience that they had. So for me, it was an opportunity to just step away from ESPN and really learn how to be a reporter and a better journalist. So I had an opportunity to take a weekly reporter job at Alabama. And I think that was one of the best decisions I could do, because if you ask anyone to say, hey, how did you go from ESPN to working at a weekly newspaper? But for me, it was the opportunity to really hone my craft and really learn and be a better reporter and a better journalist. And from there, I'll probably say maybe a year after being there, I got promoted to the daily newspaper, which was the Montgomery Advertiser. And I was helping out with some of the beats. So I was helping out with Alabama coverage, Auburn football coverage. I was the prep writer for one of our larger communities. And so that's how I really got into the mix of it. But after a while, you started to see like this change, this shift in journalism. Like the newsrooms were getting smaller, it became less about interesting stories. It became more about clicks. And for me, it it was just, it was time to leave. But, when I moved from Alabama to Indiana, and I wanted to give journalism another try. So I got on with the Northwest Indiana Times, and it still was the same. I got there maybe 2 months after I started. The editor who hired me, the sports editor, got laid off. And I was just like, yeah, I need to get out of here. This is
yeah.
It's not going to work out for me. So that's how I ended up at Ivy Tech. That's the real reason I ended up at Ivy Tech. I was really figuring out how can I take my skill set and transition that to just another entity.
Okay. So was the move to Times in Northwest Indiana, was that looking to get closer to home?
In a sense, so me and my wife, my girlfriend at the time, we were doing a long distance relationship, and she had just took a job at Purdue Northwest.
Okay.
And it just made sense for me. I was just like, all right, I'm really, this newspaper thing just isn't working out, but I'm willing to give it another try and just, work on our relationship, closer. And it was, like I said, it was one of the best decisions I could have made.
Yeah, well, and there's been a lot of guests on the podcast who made a similar switch, and we could spend all the time we have together talking about the changes that have happened with the media and how that has created sort of this new legion of PR folks who are from a media background, yourself included. So pretty common story, and we could maybe agree that it's an unfortunate thing that the media has shrunk, but certainly it's led to opportunities for folks like yourself in PR. So you mentioned Ivy Tech, and that's where you and I met. So Ivy Tech Community College, most people listening to the podcast probably recognize that name. It's Indiana's community college system. And Cortez, you were there for about 4 years. Do I have that right?
Yeah, a little bit over 4 years. Yep.
Okay, and what was your role at Ivy Tech? If you can talk a little bit about the work you did there and where you were at Ivy Tech and what your role was.
So when I started, I was the assistant director of marketing and communications at the South Bend Elkhart campus. And maybe about 2 years after being there, I was promoted to director. So that's how I went from assistant director to director at Ivy Tech. But Ivy Tech was great. It was my first time really understanding what it is to be a marketer, doing marketing enrollment. And so I'm glad I had that opportunity to really learn what it is to, understand enrollment marketing.
Yeah, well, and I'm glad you made that distinction because a lot of folks think PR and marketing are synonymous, but as you know, and as I've learned over the years, they're very much not. PR is one facet of it. So it sounds like you had a great experience in learning other skills that marketers need to have. And then you made another change where you went in a completely different direction, it looks like, into the world of gaming. What was the precedent for making that change? And then tell us a little bit about the work you did there.
It was kind of twofold for me. So there was a leadership change at Ivy Tech. And, I think, when new leadership comes in, changes, typically happen. And for me, it was just, to try something new. So when the role came available with Caesars, it was a brand new position. They never had anyone that had done PR. And to be able to, do PR in the Chicago market, that really, did something for me. It made me more interested because, I could build something, from the ground up. So that was the reason I went to Caesars, to have the opportunity to work in the Chicago market, to actually see did I have what it takes to do PR in the market, such as Chicago, and also to build that role, to be the first person to ever do it at that property was one of the things that really gleaned into.
All right. And then you pivoted back to education, and including where you are now. So tell us, and then we'll talk about the organization you work for today, but tell us a little bit about that pivot back to another community college and then to Birmingham. What preceded those changes and what's that transition been like for you?
So I think for most people, when COVID hit, I was still at Caesars. And I think just COVID, just as a whole, you've seen a lot of people that were dying, family members, people were losing family members at a drastic rate. And for me and my wife, we just decided that we wanted to move back to Michigan, be closer to home, closer to family. And that was the decision to really get back to Michigan. And I had the opportunity to go back into higher ed at Washington Community College as one of their marketing managers. So that was the reason to pivot back. So it wasn't really did I want to or not go back to higher ed? It was just more about COVID and how me and my wife felt about, being closer to family. And so I had the opportunity to come back to Michigan.
Yeah, so right opportunity at the right time then.
Definitely.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so let's talk about where you have landed now, and that's with the Birmingham Public Schools system. And we've had folks on the podcast, a couple folks from Fort Wayne Community Schools, which is the public school system here that is local to where our business is headquartered. So we've heard a little bit about that world, but tell us about the world of being a marketer in secondary education. What's that like? What is Birmingham Public Schools all about, and what's your role with the organization?
So my role is way more deeper than working at Ivy Tech or my previous positions. When I was at Ivy Tech, we had my team would fluctuate from probably having, one person to three to having none. Here, I have a team of three. We work really close together. And Birmingham Public Schools, is one of these communities that's, we're considered one of the top 10 school districts in the state of Michigan. And we're kind of competing with private schools. So that's where the marketing piece is really important for this district, is because, we're constantly in that battle of, going after students. It's kind of like higher ed in a sense where, you're trying to get students to enroll. So that's where I feel like my skill set has helped the organization is coming in and understanding enrollment marketing and how can we, better, so-called keep students in a district versus allowing them to go to private schools. So we have some big name private schools here. So we have a Country Day and a Brother Rice, like literally right around the corner that we're competing with, for students.
So Cortez, for those who might be unfamiliar with the concept, a lot of people think kids just go to the school, where their home is located, and that's the end of the story. But you mentioned competition. How has that evolved, and why does Birmingham now find itself in a position where it has to compete?
I think now when you think about K-12, there are more choices than ever. You have the academies, you have private schools, and you have public schools. So families just have more choices than ever. So I think that's just where the game has transitioned to, is just trying to understand what's best for your respective students, what makes sense, what curriculums are being offered, what is the school vibe. Diversity is another conversation that is starting to become real big. So just having those opportunities and understanding how can you help an organization that's in K-12, filter out those type of decisions that need to be made in order to, help enrollment or boost enrollment.
Well, and when Birmingham strives to compete against these other options that families have, what are some of your points of pride? What are some of the things that you try to put forward as differentiators for the system, things that should make families, pay a little more close attention to Birmingham and see it as a good choice?
So I think the thing that kind of separates it is that, it's perceived that only private schools, especially, private schools with the name or the cachet of a Brother Rice or Country Day, is that, they're going to get you to the Ivy League schools or the Michigans or, just the bigger name universities. Whereas, here at Birmingham Public Schools, we have students that, that are going to Harvard, Princeton, University of Michigan, all the big names, Northwestern. So I think it's just trying to let parents understand that your student, it really doesn't matter. I wouldn't say it doesn't matter where they go to school at, but we can get your student to the Ivy League or their dream school just like any other private school would have that opportunity to.
All right. So in your role, you mentioned three other folks on your team. So as you're in your position as marketing communication manager, how does the team work together? Who else is on the team, and how do you get all the work done that needs to happen?
So I have a production, I wouldn't call him a videographer, but his official title is production. So he handles all the graphic designs, video, things of that nature. I have a super awesome secretary. She's kind of like, she does everything for us to really good. And I say a team of three is because I include myself as a team of three.
Got it.
And I am the one that kind of, I'm always having my hand in something, but also doing from a leadership standpoint and trying to make sure we do everything that needs to be done, and being in those, those meetings to make sure that our voice is heard and explaining what needs to be done.
Sure, sure. So I tried to give you another staff member there that you didn't have. I tried to give you a team of four. And let's talk about some of the things you've been working on. I understand that you recently launched a website that's gotten some nice accolades. I think you posted about an award that you received there. So congratulations on that. Now that work is maybe a little bit behind you, not that a website's ever done, but maybe the heavy lifting is done. What are some of the things you're focused on, some of your priorities moving forward?
I think my priorities now are starting to focus to preschool. So Michigan, the state of Michigan is trying to implement universal pre-K for the entire state, but they're kind of a couple of years away from doing it. So it's kind of a soft launch as of right now. So one of the things that we're doing is we're trying to implement a pre-K program here at Birmingham for 4-year-olds, and that's something that we're really starting to glean into and figure out how can we lay the bones now, so that way when universal preschool becomes a thing for the state of Michigan, we already have those wheels in place, and it's already a rolling opportunity for our community.
Sure, and I would imagine one of the reasons that you want to be able to compete well for those students is once you get them in as preschoolers, much more likely they're going to persist with Birmingham and stay on board. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's kind of the thing for all K-12 right now, is trying to get, make sure you're holding on to your population, so to speak, as much as possible. And so, because I think the thing is that most families, once they get into a district and they're comfortable with that, no matter what, if the drive is an hour away, if they're comfortable with that, that's where they stay. So we're trying to make sure that families who come to the district or are interested in a district, come in as early as possible, and we keep them all the way through graduation.
Yeah, well, that's great. Well, that's great. Well, Cortez, I want to pivot to some more quick hit questions, some of the things we've touched upon, but would like to hear about from you in a little more detailed way. And one has to do with careers. You started in one direction, you pivoted to a new direction, you've worked in other states, you've worked in a variety of different industries. From all of that, what's your biggest takeaway about what it takes to be successful and fulfilled in your career? If you were giving somebody advice about how to have a happy, fulfilling career, what would you tell them?
I think I always say just try to stay ahead of what's coming down the pipe. I think for me, so one of the things that I'm really proud of myself was that when social media and journalism were kind of like having that conversation, oh, we can really, promote our stories through social media. So for me, just having my own personal social media, I knew exactly what to do. I had some older coworkers that kind of like really struggled with social media and how to connect the dots with, promoting their story from a marketing standpoint. For me, it was just something like, oh, I know how to do this. This is pretty simple. So just leaning more into just trying to figure out what's the next thing in that industry that you're in, and just trying to make sure that you connect those dots to make sure that you're not outdated, so to speak, in a sense.
I think that's great advice. There to build on what you spoke about. There were a lot of folks in journalism who looked at social media as kind of the enemy and as a threat. And what we've seen over time is that there's been a growth in sort of citizen journalists and content creators that has created this groundswell of content from average people that does compete. So in some respects, journalists were correct that it was going to compete with them. But if you kind of put your head in the sand and said, I'm just going to hope that goes away, you're going to be proven wrong. So kudos for you for saying, hey, this is inevitable. This is where the shift is happening. So I have to skill up in this area. As we look at tools that are impacting marketers, one of the things there's a lot of conversation about right now is AI tools like Chat GPT. Is that something that you're trying to get a handle on? Is that something that you're not quite there yet? Where are you with AI and how that's changing our world?
A AI tool that I use every day. So it's writesonic.com, and it's really for writers. So it has it has a great AI component. But I think the thing that I use a lot is that they have a rephrase option. So when we were updating our website, to not bring the same content over, I would just, copy that content, put it in there, and it would rephrase it in different words, but have the same meaning. So that was one of the tools that, I'm using every day. We have a weekly newsletter that goes out to our community. So when you're getting news items that come in, I don't have to spend time trying to rewrite them and make them, a little bit more polished. I can take that content, pop it in there, and then rephrase it. I can put it onto our newsletter and just move on. So I think it's one of those time-saving tools that really comes in handy if you're just, really don't have time to sit down and rethink content and try to make it a little bit more fresher.
Yeah, that's a great example because we all, can get kind of stuck in using the same voice. And when you put out as much content as I'm sure you do, it can be, the danger can be that gets kind of repetitive. So that's a great example. And it shows that these tools don't necessarily need to be a threat to, what we do. They can be a good complement to what we do.
Oh,
All right.
definitely.
Second quick hit question has to do with the work you do, either, and you can take this wherever you want to go. It could be about Birmingham, it can be about your work as a marketer in the public school realm. But what is a myth or misconception, something that people may think is true about your world that just isn't, or maybe something that's underappreciated that you want to give a little more attention to?
I think the thing for me probably is that, in these roles, people believe that you know everything, like every single aspect that's going on. And that's just not true. I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes you're in the dark in some situations. So, you hear things fourth and third, reference. And I'm like, oh, I didn't know that was going on, or I didn't know that was happening. And some people like, you should know. And I'm like, well, it's a lot of things that, as a communication person that you have your hands in, and you just don't know. I think that's probably the biggest misconception is that the person in these type of roles knows everything, and that's just not true. Sometimes you're just behind the eight ball on some items that just didn't come past your plate, and so it's always someone say, you didn't know this event was going on. I'm like, I had no idea. I was doing X, Y, and Z,
Yeah.
trying to
Yeah.
get things accomplished, especially when you have the split in this position, having a marketing component and a communication component. So you're always pulled in two different directions all the time.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure there's times if your experience has been like mine where your response is, well, I wish I had known about that as the person who is charged with telling the organization's story. Would have been nice to know that, but
Yeah,
you can't be everywhere at once, especially if people aren't forthcoming with the information. So
yeah.
I empathize with that. All right, last quick hit question has to do with the tools you use at work. And a lot of people think of apps and technology when I say that, and certainly that's part of it, but it could be something that's analog as well. What's a tool that you use that is important to you in getting the job done? Because you have a complex job with a team of just three, you're doing a lot of the heavy lifting yourself. And I'm going to take Right Sonic off the table. I'm going to say you can't use that as an example because you've already used it. What's something else you use in your work that's important to you?
I think I swear by my iPad.
All right.
To have my iPad available because, it functions as a so-called mini laptop, so to speak. So I think having that available, especially being on call in these type of positions 24/7, you never know when you just need to pull over, whip out your iPad, type up something or send an email or things of that nature. So I swear by my iPad is just always having it. It's with me at meetings, it's with me, if I'm on vacation. So I'm always having it just to make sure that I'm always staying connected if a call comes through and you need to have some type of emergency communication that needs to go out or anything that you need to make sure that you have access to. So that's just kind of my access point for everything with my job.
So help me understand, and I ask this question as a productivity geek. I love my tools. I love having different use cases for different tools. What does your iPad do that you can't do on a phone? Why is that your go-to more than just your iPhone or your Android device?
I think because I try to just make sure that I separate using my phone versus using my iPad. I think that's just a personal thing for me. I just feel more comfortable just having, maybe just a larger screen, a tad bit larger screen versus using my phone. Even though the phone, having an iPhone or a smartphone comes in handy, but I think just having that iPad for me is just a little bit bigger screen, gives me a little bit more feel of as if I have my laptop in front of me.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I have a tablet, but the separation for me, I'm an Android person, so all of my world is Google and Android. But for me, I try to say that my tablet is entertainment only, right? It is, I don't have social media apps on it. I don't even have Outlook on it. So the separation for me is it's a non-work tool, but I like what you said about more screen size, something that simple, especially, when you're going through emails and other things that are work related can be kind of daunting on a phone, but to have that extra screen space it makes it a little bit easier to take in, especially with as much stuff as you have to consume, I'm sure, on a daily basis.
Most definitely.
Yeah. Well, Cortez, this has been great. I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down with us and hear a little bit more about your story and the work that you do. Very much appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. And thanks to everybody who took the opportunity to listen to this episode of the Asher Marketing Podcast. We'll be back next time with another great guest, and we hope you'll join us then.